Hey everyone, welcome to the ATDev Podcast. We have a very special guest today, Dr. Rory Cooper. Dr. Cooper, thank you so much for being here.
Owen, it's my pleasure. Always good to speak with you, my friend.
Yeah, same. So you have a really impressive career in assistive technology and beyond. It's hard to sum up, but I would love it if you could maybe give our audience a little bit of info on your background and your journey.
Thank you. I guess the short story is I'm the founder and currently still the director of the Human Engineering Research Laboratories, and we're just over 32 years old. And we're a joint institute of the University of Pittsburgh and the U.S. Department of Affairs, Office of Research and Development. And I'm an engineer by training, also a Paralympic athlete and an inventor, and proud member of the National Inventors Hall of Fame, and recipient of the National Medal of Technology and Innovation from the President of the United States. But my biggest accomplishment, I think, is creating technology that millions of people use around the United States, including Owen here. It's
Yeah.
pretty exciting.
Yeah, that's so cool. And I think you were just an example of really the power of designing for the end user and people that really understand the problems that they're solving. And particularly in the disabilities, that impact is so tangible. And it's really cool to connect and learn from people like yourself who are, as you said, developing the technology that people use every day.
I think my philosophy has always been to design with people with disabilities and create more opportunities for people with disabilities to become engineers and scientists and healthcare providers and whatever they do to pursue their dreams, but to have the tools and the resources available to achieve their goals in life. And if you listen to people, you can learn a lot.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, and I think you touched on something really crucial that resonates a lot with me is that technology, to a certain extent, in the disability space, is a means to an end. For me, this technology is what enables me to live independently in my community, have a meaningful career. And I'm curious, as you look at your career and how you have seen technology evolve. What design trends do you see that are two sides, both exciting, but also what is frustrating from your perspective?
And of course, like you, I use technology in order to be able to live at home and work and try to contribute to society. As you, I'm also a wheelchair user and use an adapted vehicle and a number of other assistive devices. So I have a personal connection. But actually, what frustrates me to some extent is the stagnation that we've seen in the commercial sector of wheelchairs and some other assistive devices over the last 30 so years, despite the number of accomplishments. I mean, are some things like the digital controls and algorithms that we created for joysticks, or they're about almost 20 years old now, and they're used widely. And the ergonomic push rims, that's also about 25 years ago we invented those. Some
Hmm.
of the new things, there's some things that have certainly come to market, but I've been around long enough that there was a lot more innovation in the 80s and 90s, and there seems to have been post 2000. There's probably a little bit of, not because of research. I think research and new product development in academia and from small innovators has been happening. It's just, I think the reimbursement of the insurance payment environment is such that it really drives people towards reducing cost versus creating new innovative products. I'm ever the optimist and think that we need to continue to develop, investigate, and develop new technologies, invent new technologies that improve our lives, such as with our RAMP project with support from ARPA-H. It's robotic mobility. I think is still the future, and it's the computing power is there. There's been advances in motors and battery technology, if we can actually get them in the field, I'm excited that hopefully ATDev will once again be a company that sort of transforms the industry and moves it in a different direction or accelerates advancement. So I think I'm also really excited about that concept of kirigami-inspired design,
Yeah.
cutting and folding sheets of engineered materials such as aluminum, steel, titanium, or even composite materials to make higher quality and more affordable manual wheelchairs and especially sports and recreation equipment. So we could really take advantage of advances in computer design, advances in manufacturing tools such as laser cutters and CNC press brakes, and also advancing in computing power and artificial intelligence for that matter. What it's going to I think is going to do for both inspiring design as well as enabling, of course, better simulation in a virtual environment, translate that to a real world, what people call physical AI,
Yeah.
and then greater use of sensors and sensor fusion to provide people who are either unable or have difficulty having independent mobility today to have independent mobility by having working sort of as cobots in some ways, right? The
Yeah.
robot and the person actually seamlessly, intimately working together. The robotic arms along the same line provide the same thing because really it's not about just about mobility, it's about mobility and manipulation or the object, or maybe the better way to think about to be able to move yourself in space as well as objects in space, right? You want to
Yeah.
be able to do something together.
Fantastic. Yeah, you touched on so many things. I think we could do a podcast on every single one of those. But I'm curious to know from your perspective, I think it's so interesting how you have seen technology in the wheelchair space. There's trends of innovation and trends of stagnation. And personally, from my perspective, I was born after the ADA was signed, and my lived experience as a person with a disability in the United States is really, there's never been a better time or a better place to have a disability. Not that you want to have a disability, but we're not living in the Roman times where they throw you off a cliff if you have a disability. And so I'm really, personally excited to be in an age where there is national interest in this problem. And I think it relates a lot to the aging crisis as well. 10,000 people turn 60 every day, and a quarter of them are going to need mobility supports. And I think a lot of people, as they age, are realizing that technology advancement is not evenly distributed. Your iPhone is a lot more advanced than power wheelchairs. And I think there's going to be a lot of frustration as more and more people start to realize that. And so I'm curious, you mentioned a disconnect between academic research and commercialization. What do you think the drivers of that disconnect is, and how how can academic research be more easily commercialized?
So I think the disconnect it belongs to a little bit to both sides. Sometimes academics are not necessarily on target with what they're working on, or they might be slightly askew. And then I think the other side, there's not a lot of investment on the industry side for research and development in the AD sector. And of course, in my view, there's always two valleys of death. So one of them is if the university doesn't bring things far enough, you get the first valley of death and they don't make it into the commercials. They don't find a commercial partner.
Hmm.
And then the other side is if they find a commercial partner, but there's not adequate reimbursement or coding or even or a market in cash sales, then the devices. And sometimes it's an investment capital thing. We've created some really amazing products with high consumer demand and even people willing to pay for it, but there's not the capitalization on the industry side.
Right.
They don't just have either if the startup company doesn't have the investment capital, or even an established company really doesn't have the investment capital to start new major innovation. That I think is one of the challenges that has to do in some ways with the way our healthcare system addresses technology that many of us with disabilities use. And then I also think it'll change to some extent. I hope, as you noted, as more people age and require access to mobility technology, and those
Yeah.
people have means. A lot of the innovation that occurred in the 1980s was not due to innovations or changes in the healthcare system, but really due to consumer demand and people willing to pay out of pocket
Mm.
and then argue with their insurance company or their state or government agency in order to get a return on their at least some partial payment for the technology they purchased.
Right.
I think that's a little bit on the consumer side, so that consumers may be becoming a little more vocal in this space and advocating more assertively for themselves is also needed. So it's a multifaceted challenge. I agree with you 100%. The life I lived with a disability prior to the Americans with Disabilities Act, I've seen the changes post the American Disabilities Act, but it's a little bit surprising because like the technology we're using today, right? How that so rapidly evolved and then it became ubiquitous and then also has largely been accessible, right? It's allowing us to talk almost seamlessly, even if we're in several states apart, or two separate
Yeah.
states or two different states. And a lot of the technology that we're using right now are that could, I can see your phone in the screen, right? And
Yeah.
my phone's laying on my desk, and there's enough computing power in there to transform most of the AT we use today.
Yeah.
And so we somehow have to get the more of the academic and engineering community engaged in understanding that. We also need to get the consumers to hopefully be professionals, but also to so we got as participatory design becomes more central across the all of engineering and research, then hopefully we can identify problems better, and then we have to find better commercial pathways. Hopefully that means innovation in some of the existing companies, but if not, maybe it's time for disruption. The companies that we have today that make telephones are not the companies that made telephones 30 years ago.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
For
That's
that
so.
matter, the companies that make cameras today are not the companies that made cameras 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I think, yeah, I mean, assistive technology and rehabilitation engineering, it is so challenging because it's so multidisciplinary. And that's part of the reason why we started this podcast is to share stories across all of the spectrum of the different viewpoints, both from it's a clinical problem, it's a occupational therapy problem, it's a physical therapy problem, it's also an engineering problem. The wheelchairs today are highly engineered and they require a specialized industry to be built around them. They're not unlike aerospace engineering in terms of specialization. And there's also the end users who are the ones that have to use the technology. And I think that, from my perspective, I think that there there needs to be an easier software bridge between academic institutions and commercial entities. Because I think that a lot of students at universities want to work on assistive technology because it has such a tangible impact into improving someone's life. You can see before and after if you make a device for someone, how that enables them to do more. But then, in order to get that to regulatory, that's a whole other ballgame, and the industry standards right now are just they're not incentivized to adopt new products. They have their niche that they live in, and that's fine. And I think that's if that's the game that they want to play, then by all means let them. But I think that there is a growing demand, and I think particularly around AI, the consumers are realizing that, that there's a better option that could be available. And I think with potentially consolidating the consumers' buying power to some extent, I think there can be some really exciting advancements.
I agree completely. And I do think young people and students are very interested in AT because of the complexity of the problems and the ability to help people in a tangible way and an immediate way. And I often say that one of the real benefits of working in this field is you can actually meet people that actually benefited from from your work, right, in an obvious and tangible way. And I think that's appealing to a lot of students as well. I think we do have to change things. Like the Americans with Disabilities Act, there in some ways there needs to be maybe a revision of that includes access to technology. I mean, there are some aspects of technology that are addressed, such as communications and technology and internet and websites. But I think there is, and on the mobility side, I think one of the challenges is they focused highly on the built environment and in some ways
Hmm.
on the public transportation, but not as much about personal mobility devices.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot has changed since the A was passed. I think that access to technology has become a human right in a lot of respects. And I think access to technology is a disability. I think if you look at me without my wheelchair, without my technology, the story is very different. And I view that as a human right. I know we're getting close on time here, but I would love if you could maybe just uh, share a few words to, sorry, I got something stuck in my throat, uh, to people that are, I wonder if you just share a few words to young engineers or entrepreneurs or researchers that are interested in moving this field forward.
For my minds, the young researchers and engineers is keep moving forward. Right? There's it's got wonderful career opportunities. It's very personally rewarding, and to dedicate your life to serving other people and through engineering and science. But also, it's a teamwork. I think the key to Hurl's success is we have engineers and physicians and therapists and other people, and counselors and others, all working together, sharing those different perspectives, as well as a large number of veterans, as well as a large number of people who are with disabilities and end users themselves. And so you're having those multiple roles where you can bring all of your skills to the table and your own perspectives to the table is really important. And I do think that to solve significant challenges or grand challenges, it takes teamwork. It takes convergence teams, so people working together seamlessly and sharing equally and contributing to the best of their ability is one of the key efforts that needs to drive us forward. And I'm optimistic that young people do that. I often kid them a little bit that, especially undergraduate students, are like pollinators. They take classes from different professors and different departments and different schools, and plus they have life experiences and their friends, and they help bring those concepts together, and they can make things to be very creative. And it's also, I think, intergenerational research is also important.
Mm.
There's value to having life experience and historical perspective, as just as there's value to being a native to new technologies that's somewhat sort of totally integrated into the lives of young people. And all of those those perspectives together can also really drive further advances. And the other thing I think is avoid the fear of failure. I don't
Mm.
really see in a lot of engineering or design that we truly fail per se. Obviously, you don't want to cause any harm, but it is a process as a discovery often. And every time you find something that doesn't work, you learn a little bit more, and then you can discover pathways that might be more effective. And so I think the understanding the fundamentals of science and engineering is also very important to move things move things forward.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so much to learn here. And yeah, thank you, Dr. Cooper. This has been, yeah, so enlightening, and it's such a, yeah, privilege to be working with you. And thank you to all our listeners. If you found this episode interesting, please subscribe and share. All right. Thank you, Dr. Cooper.
Thank you, Owen. My pleasure to be with you as always.